London, 1966, a grey November afternoon. But the flags are bright, and warm hearts wait to welcome President Ayub Khan of Pakistan. At the Tate Gallery beside the River Thames, a guard of honour was drawn up, and Her Majesty the Queen waited to receive the President. He landed at London Airport and been met there by His Royal Highness Prince Philip, who'd accompanied him on the drive into London. The Tate is one of London's great art galleries, and although it isn't often that visitors are welcomed there, it makes a gracious background to the ceremonial of a royal reception. The Guard of Honour, mounted by the 2nd Battalion Scots Guards, had the honour of being inspected by the President. Then the royal carriages drew up for the drive to Buckingham Palace. In the first, the Queen took her place, followed by the President, who sat beside her. Prince Philip was the last to get in. The President's daughter, the Begum Nazim Aurangzeb, was in the second carriage. All along the gaily decorated route to the palace, troops from the 3 armed services stood at attention, and the Queen and the President were accompanied by a sovereign's escort of the household cavalry. In front of Buckingham Palace, Pakistanis from all over London had assembled to greet their President as he drove by on his way to stay with the Queen in her London home. At Westminster Abbey later in the day, the President was received by the Dean, who escorted him to the grave of the unknown warrior. Here the President paid tribute to men and women who died fighting for the Commonwealth in 2 world wars. After the ceremony, the Dean invited the President to sign the visitor's book. The President is no stranger to Britain. He's been a regular visitor to Commonwealth conferences and has seen the changes taking place in London. The tall buildings soaring skywards above the traditional heart of the city like signposts to space. Early on the 2nd day of his visit, the Queen and the President went to the Science Museum to open the Engineers' Day exhibition, where some of the most recent developments in engineering, from coal cutters to satellites, were on view. As a soldier himself, the President was naturally interested to see the Army's model of a Chieftain tank. In the evening, the Prime Minister and Mrs. Wilson received the President at Lancaster House, where he met ministers and prominent members of Parliament. After dinner, he was able to talk to many of them informally. Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland. And at Waverley Station, the Lord Provost of the city waited to receive the President, who had travelled overnight from London to begin a 5-day tour of Britain. The Minister of State for Scotland and a number of distinguished citizens were at the station to meet the President. There, too, were 2 little girls, Sabia Usmani and Razia Mohammed, to welcome him on behalf of Pakistanis living in Scotland. Holyrood House is the Queen's Palace in Edinburgh. The President drove there from the station and stayed in the state apartments. Later in the morning, he walked in the palace gardens, talking to representatives of Scotland's Pakistani societies, whom he'd earlier received in the throne room of the palace. Altogether, there are more than 7,000 Pakistanis in Scotland. And as the Secretary of State told the President, they and their humour have become a part of Scottish life. At Sighthill Laboratories, close to Edinburgh, the President saw some of the most advanced nuclear detecting equipment in the world. This highly sensitive camera helps doctors to diagnose diseases of the kidney, the liver, and the brain. A human body monitor, which interested his daughter, the Begum, locates disorders of the body and produces immediate evidence for medical treatment. Minerals and oil can be detected from the air with this portable equipment, which the President said might be used effectively in Pakistan. The equipment developed at Sighthill is used in hospitals, universities, and research establishments all over the world. And earlier this year, the firm won the Queen's Award for Industry for their work. Leaving Edinburgh, the President crossed the River Forth by the new bridge, which the Queen opened in 1964. The Forth Railway Bridge in the background was built more than 70 years ago. Glenrothes is a rising new town with 4 shopping centres, plenty of schools, 19 major industries, and its own small airfield. Here, the children gave the President a great welcome when he arrived to have lunch and discuss the planning of new towns with the chairman of the Development Corporation. Calder Hall was the world's first large-scale nuclear power station when it was opened by the Queen in 1956. The President had particularly asked for a visit to a nuclear power station, and at Calder he was shown how atomic energy is put to work. Britain pioneered the peaceful uses of atomic energy, and now has 7 nuclear power stations and can claim more experience in designing and operating them than any other country. Britain also has the biggest output of nuclear power in the world. The adjoining plant at Windscale is testing a prototype reactor which will improve methods of producing nuclear power. Already it's supplying electricity for homes and industry. On his way south towards London, the President visited Manchester, where the city centre had been almost completely rebuilt. Here, the evening reception given by the Pakistani Society was packed out, and there were another 400 people outside the hotel. There are altogether nearly 200,000 Pakistanis living in Britain. Speaking to an enthusiastic audience, the President reminded his countrymen of the friendship between Pakistan and Britain. Scientists call the giant telescope at Jodrell Bank the Big Dish. There are now 4 smaller dishes there as well. When the President visited the laboratories, Sir Bernard Lovell, the director, took him first to the control room, where they spent some time together before going out to look at the giant telescope itself. Practically every satellite ever launched has been tracked from Jodrell Bank. Pictures of the moon's surface were received here. The telescope is like an enormous bowl held out to collect knowledge from the atmosphere. The President's son-in-law went up into the bowl with Sir Bernard. A curious experience if you're not used to it. In London, the President was host to the royal family. Princess Margaret was the first to arrive. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. To entertain the Queen and his other royal guests, a company of Pakistani dancers had been flown in from Karachi. Another of the President's special requests was for a visit to International Computers and Tabulators, who have just shipped one of their computers to Karachi. Going round with the experts, he showed a keen interest in the operations of data processing equipment, which can handle anything from simple accounting to complicated reports, and staff training. In London's historic Guildhall on the last day of his visit, the President attended a ceremony of traditional splendor. Escorted by the Lord Mayor, he entered the library where city dignitaries and some 700 distinguished guests awaited him. Seated beside the Lord Mayor, he listened to an address of welcome, which was then presented to him in a silver casket engraved with the Pakistan coat of arms and the City of London crest. Then the company walked in ceremonial procession to the banqueting hall. In his speech after lunch, the Lord Mayor referred to the long associations which linked Britain with Pakistan and expressed admiration for Pakistan's progress under the President's leadership. The President spoke of the welcome he had received in Britain. Earlier, he'd referred to his own country's efforts to create a progressive and forward-looking society. We are determined, he said, to ensure for our people a good measure of material prosperity and the right conditions for their intellectual development. He ended on a lighter note.
And I met nothing but kindness. Kindness to this extent that they walked me off my feet. And I'm very grateful for it. And may I say, God bless you, and thank you very much indeed.